welcome to the October episode of Fintech Firebrand. I'm Virginie O'Shea, founder of Firebrand Research, and I'm here to chat to you about this month's Fintech and finreg news. Now, it'd be remiss of me to start anything this month without talking about the trial that's on everyone's lips at the moment. The Sam Bankman-Fried trial has started officially at the start of this month. At the moment, we're going through the jury selection process. Michael Lewis has also just released a book about SBF and the trials and tribulations of FTX over the last couple of years, its rise as a prominent crypto platform and its decline as a Ponzi scheme. So no doubt lots of people will be watching the trial with interest to see whether the criminal charges against SBF are held up. To be fair, there's already been 4 of his, as the SEC would call them, co-conspirators that have already pled guilty to fraud. So certainly it's not looking too great for SBF. I no doubt the trial will go on for quite a long time. We expect lots of different industry witnesses to be involved as well. So keep watching this space, see what impact it has on the overall crypto markets. We're currently still in crypto winter. Don't think this is going to thaw out things anytime soon. So keep an eye on that. Now, talking about the SEC, they've also had an extremely busy month over the last month. At the end of September, the chair, Gary Gensler, was once again in front of the US House Financial Services Committee for a proper grilling. It was several hours of discussions with each of the different representatives who were questioning him on everything from the equity market structure proposals that were released by the SEC earlier this year through to the usual suspect topics of digital assets, blockchain, ESG, another big topic. A lot of resentment on the part of some of the politicians about the imposition of ESG data and requirements for issuers around that. So there's been a lot of pushback on sustainability overall from one side of the aisle. So certainly interesting to see the continued themes that were raised last year when Gensler took the stand. They cropped up again this year with a little bit more nuance. Certainly on the crypto front, there were a lot of questions about why the SEC has not approved a lot of the ETF. The crypto ETF proposals from all and sundry. There are many requests out there for crypto ETFs that are in limbo at the moment, not least of which is BlackRock's ETF proposal. So there was, Gensler didn't give away too much, to be fair, as he usually does not, and referred a lot of the questions over to later follow-ups with written responses to some of the questions that were raised. And he asked many of them to wait for due process to go forward. He noted that there's going to be a lot more consultations coming forward. I think there's about 55 different SEC regulations in the wings at the moment that are in proposal status that are expected to be implemented before, I think, March 2024. So that's quite a docket to get through with regards to reviews. Certainly, there are many more things that are coming through that aren't just the SEC as well. The SEC has also been very busy this month and the previous month and the previous month and the one before that, no doubt, with enforcement actions. I think we're going to heading on for a record year of enforcement with the SEC. We also saw the CFTC had a large enforcement at the start of October with a view to 3 large financial institutions, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs and Bank of America. They had to pay over $50 million for swap reporting failures. And now this is the 4th such record-keeping issue that has been leveled at Goldman Sachs by that regulator in the last 18 months. So there have been a few speeches by the CFTC about the culture of non-compliance within that particular financial institution. So I think there's a degree of frustration on the part of some of the regulators about some of the financial institutions not being seen to take compliance matters seriously enough, there's been a lot of discussion both by the SEC and the CFTC about putting up fines further. So watch this space. RegTechs, certainly there's going to be a lot of pressure on these financial institutions to address some of these underlying problems with regards to reporting. I mean, certainly there are some, common problems with regards to underreporting, overreporting, reporting the wrong data, not correcting fields that have been identified by the regulator that need to be corrected, and this being a persistent problem over time. So certainly there are lots of different things that firms need to address. The SEC actually levelled similar record-keeping fines for 10 firms, I think on the same day as the CFTC, or a day or two before, I think, or after. I can't quite remember, keep track of all these different enforcement actions. There were, 5 broker-dealers and duly listed broker-dealers, investment advisors and affiliated investment advisors. And a lot of this was to do with electronic communications. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about the use of WhatsApp and Signal. I'm sure I've referenced it. That is another area that the SEC is getting very involved in. It has asked many executives at banks to share the communications that they've had over those particular apps. So certainly this is something that we'll keep seeing more enforcement actions about through to the end of the year, no doubt. In Europe, the European Securities and Markets Authority, ESMA, also released its work plan for the next 5 years, certainly with a few also to 2024. Strategic priorities haven't changed much. There's big focus, again, thematically on sustainable finance. There's also a big thematic focus on data. Go figure, there's data focus in every regulator at the moment. Strategic priorities relate to financial market stability. I know with the wobble earlier this year with the US banks, there's a real focus in the EU to ensure that doesn't happen here. Obviously, we had our own wobble with Credit Suisse earlier in the year. We're also focusing on large financial institutions as well as the mid-tier in Europe. There's been a big focus on improving the supervision of EU financial markets, in particular with looking at the national competent authorities, NCAs, as they're always referenced by ESMA. There's a real desire to force a lot of the NCAs to take action further, particularly when implementing directives and regulations, making sure that everyone's on the same page as each other from a regulatory compliance perspective. I know that ESMA has new powers to force that action across those different regulators. So certainly that's another priority that will be going forward for the next 5 years. And again, the retail investor is everywhere at the moment. So there's a big focus on encouraging more retail investment. Firebrand's just putting out a report on proxy voting. That's another big focus in terms of shareholder engagement. We've got the review for SRD2, as I'm sure I've mentioned before, that's going forward. So that, again, shareholder voting activity. There's a lot of focus on things like class actions, corporate actions to some degree. So certainly there's a lot of change in the asset servicing world to expect for the next year or so as well. Another big topic cross-border this time was a big piece of CBDC news, central bank digital currency, Project Mariana, that was being led by the Bank for International Settlements and 3 central banks, namely the Banque de France, the Singapore National Bank, and the Bank of Switzerland. They've successfully concluded their cross-border trading and settlement of CBDCs this month as well. They released Project Mariana. They've released an update on that. So certainly any of our distributed ledger fans out there will be keeping a close eye on that. Likewise, people active in the tokenization world as well. Now, another thing I should touch upon, last month, obviously, I was out in Toronto for Sibos. I gave you a bit of a preview last month, but in terms of what was discussed, the big key themes of the conference, what was the gossip on the show floor, certainly there was a lot of discussion about topics related to tokenization. in terms of when will they take off, when will secondary markets grow to such an extent that they will be able to be supported. That's certainly something is a lot of interest from those that are experimenting with digital assets at the moment. So I will keep an eye on that. I think going forward, another area that just got so much play everywhere, as you can imagine, the buzz was around generative AI. Surprise, surprise, ChatGPT and friends. There were discussions on every vendor booth, every presentation, pretty much. Every conversation I had at some point turned to generative AI and its potential and the potential risks of it, although the latter part was probably not discussed nearly enough with regards to intellectual property, data ownership, data storage, a lot of these things that will become very important. Copyright for technology IP as well is another thing to think about from the perspective of generative AI, as we increasingly rely on machines. So my final thoughts around that are we really do need to get more of a discussion going around the legal aspects of generative AI. Obviously, there's been some discussion within regulators about the ethical implications of AI in terms of decision-making, risk-taking, that kind of thing. But we have a broad-reaching discussion about governance that needs to be had at some point within financial institutions, within regulators, and to some extent, I guess, politicians will be involved on that front, as they will be probably setting some degree of standards. Although, would I rely on a politician? I probably would not. Just as an aside, but I would say in terms of Sibos topics, another big theme related to my world was discussions about T+1, the move to shorten the settlement cycle. Lot of worries and progress updates raised throughout the week, and lots of industry initiatives to try and improve matters around market practices relating to everything from FX through to corporate actions, through to the basics of same-day affirmation. Certainly DTCC was everywhere talking about what they've been doing with regards to the testing window and some of the progress there. Obviously that started in August, so we've got a way to go before it's finished. Certainly we're creeping ever closer to May, so expect many more updates and industry discussions on that topic going forward. Also remember that the UK is discussing a move similarly, and results are expected by the end of this year. Australia is also having similar conversations. We didn't have anyone talking about what's happening in Mexico, but certainly again that's something to keep an eye on, and thus the US and Canada will be the biggest markets that we'll be keeping an eye on going forward over the next few months and through to May 2024.